Here's something I never thought I'd get the chance to say. I went on a bison hunt. Yes, in the early spring of 2026, I got the incredible chance to hunt an American buffalo, the most iconic, impressive, fascinating animal quite possibly in our country. And I had this chance because of an organization known as the American Prairie and this grand, audacious goal they have to create the largest privately kind of put together but publicly accessible nature reserve in the north central plains of Montana, and to try to restore to this landscape the full complement of wildlife that once roamed there, including our nation's mammal, bison. So, if you have not heard of the American Prairie, here's the very quick cliff notes. This conservation organization is trying to create a nature reserve on par with Yellowstone, but for the grasslands. And their plan to do that is to acquire private lands, purchase private lands from willing sellers to patch together a bunch of accessible ground in between two large pre-existing pieces of public land, and to bridge that gap, create a relatively contiguous, more than 3 million acre swath of grassland and prairie habitat that then could be restored and worked on to bring back populations of elk and bighorn sheep and pronghorn and mule deer and, yes, bison at levels that maybe have not been seen in decades and decades or hundreds of years. That is the dream. That is the goal that they are working towards. And so far, they're making pretty impressive progress. To date, it's been 20 plus years. To date, they have acquired around 600,000 acres of both owned and leased public lands that are now under their management. And there are somewhere around 1,000 bison that they have brought back to this landscape on about 40,000 acres of that swath between private and public lands that they have access to. And all of this is what made possible, my incredible opportunity to go on a buffalo hunt out there and to hunt a bison in a vast, wild, seemingly endless, unfenced landscape that I could go travel across for miles and miles and miles and feel almost like I went back in time. That made this opportunity possible. This just once in a lifetime experience that honestly blew my mind in many ways. And in a world where, we're often talking about decreasing opportunity and decreasing wildlife or access to wild places, this is a really cool opportunity to celebrate the opposite. More access, more wildlife, more, healthy landscapes that we can go and hunt on or bike across or hike across. It's a really exciting, positive story that I'm excited to share here today. And our guest today is going to help us discuss this. So today I'm joined by Scott Heidebrink, the Director of Landscape Stewardship for the American Prairie, for a discussion around the on-the-ground lived experience of working on a conservation project like this. What's it like to wake up in the morning and know that you are on the front lines of this kind of project? What's it like to be the guy that's actually out there on the ground helping restore bison to the Great Plains? To wake up in the morning and know that you're going to go out there and actually do something with your hands that's going to bring back more mule deer, more buffalo, more pronghorn. I'd love to hear that story. I want to hear that story. And that's why Scott joins me here today. And I also want to understand, why is it that a conservation project like this, in which we are trying to restore a landscape, restore wildlife populations, why does that project also involve hunting? Just like what I was able to experience. That is the plan for our conversation here today. And it's a conversation I'm really excited to share. And when I recorded this interview several weeks back, that was simply how I was looking at this, as a exciting conversation, as a celebration of something that I think is much needed these days, which is a opportunity of a conservation win. But there is one part of this American Prairie story that I have left out to this point, and that's the fact that there are some who do not want to see the American Prairie fulfill their mission. And the reasons for that are complex, And there are many different kinds of reasons for that, but most of them stem from concerns around the future of ranching and agriculture in this landscape, concerns about traditional ways of life. And then there's also some simple, just anti-conservation pushback as well. And we purposely didn't get into that side of things very much in this conversation because I just wanted to focus on, what's happening on the ground here. That said, I don't mean to suggest that this part of the story is not an important one and that these questions and concerns are not worth asking. I think they are. And my colleague, Steve Ranella, did ask many of those questions in another episode of his podcast, the Meat Eater Podcast, with the CEO of American Prairie. So if you are interested in that part of this, I'd highly suggest you go listen to, I believe it's episode 851 of the Meat Eater Podcast. But the upshot of these concerns and this controversy is that politics and politicians have now gotten involved with this American Prairie project to some degree. And most recently, the federal government, by way of the Bureau of Land Management, has now has proposed canceling the grazing permits that American Prairie has that allow them to have bison on public lands. So those permits, the ability for them to have bison on public lands and their own private lands, is what made my experience possible. Because I was out there hunting buffalo on a landscape that seemed, endless, that seemed unfenced, that seemed like it was all just one vast ocean of grass. But actually, in reality, it's actually a patchwork, a checkerboard of public and private lands, all together. But I didn't have to see that. I could just experience this big open landscape because of the fact that they own land and then had grazing permits on that public. Now, the BLM is suggesting that those permits should no longer be valid, despite the fact that American Prairie has had them for 20 plus years. And so, unfortunately, because of this news, just recently, Scott had to make an announcement of the fact that this hunt that I was able to be a part of, in which in this conversation you're going to hear him discuss as something he wants to and plans to and had, documented plans to continue into the future indefinitely. Now, as of just the last few days, he's had to announce that they will be canceling that hunting opportunity for this coming season. And I'll quote his text right now in that announcement. He wrote, "The uncertainty and ambiguity surrounding recent state and federal actions have made it impossible to move forward with this year's harvest. The truth is that we are facing a growing and coordinated effort by state and federal officials to restrict bison from public lands in Montana, and perhaps eventually across the country." So my bison hunt was the last of the 2025-26 season. And now, given this announcement, it's going to be the last one for an unknown period of time. So the question is this still a triumphant story? And I think that it is. But it is seemingly now a story that's complex and full of fits and starts. And you know what? That's life, right? So why should we expect the conservation of wildlife and wild places to be any different? Thanks for being here. All right, joining me now is Scott Heidebrink. Scott, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
I want to start with a hypothetical scenario. Let's imagine that you are stuck on an elevator. And I know it's a pretty long drive maybe to get to most elevators near where you live. So let's say you're in Billings or Missoula or something, and you're on an elevator going into, let's say, a hotel room. And there's someone in that elevator with you who's obviously not from town. They're not from Montana. They're traveling from afar. And they look over at you and you say, "Hey, what do you do?" And you have to explain to them in the span of this, we'll call it a long elevator ride, what American Prairie is, who this organization is that you work for, what you guys are doing in the world. How do you explain that to someone in those kinds of situations?
Yeah, I usually start, like my typical thing is, we're a nonprofit conservation organization, which that's a super broad category to throw yourself into. So to get a little more specific, we're here in north central Montana. And what we do is we purchase lands that are for sale. And our focus on management is around the ecosystem. So looking at all the pieces of the ecosystem puzzle and keeping the ones that are still existing and intact on the ground, keeping those going. And then is there anything missing from the ecosystem that we can return? So is that habitat related? It could be, riparian restoration, or is that animal related? Could that mean more elk or bison or black-footed ferrets? So looking at every piece of the puzzle, bringing them back to the landscape, and really completing that picture with opening up a landscape where people can come see that intact ecosystem, experience the prairie, experience those animals.
Why does that kind of work matter? Why does this vision matter?
For me, it's real simple. There's not a lot of grasslands left in the world. It's the most endangered ecosystem worldwide. And there's really only 4 places left on the planet where there are large-scale grasslands left and intact. And maybe they're missing a few pieces, but with a little help, we can see, what those people 200 years ago saw when they showed up on the prairies, and, have a place for people to experience those ecosystems that are disappearing at an alarming rate.
Yeah. All right. So you just mentioned this vision of the past, right? What did these people 200 years ago see when they showed up on the Great Plains? I frequently wonder about the same thing. And I have a picture that gets painted in my head when I think about that. What picture do you paint in your head when you imagine that past and what that might have looked like? What's your vision when you imagine that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see is bison, because that's what I work with on a daily basis here. But the tons of wildlife, and all the readings I've done and stuff like that, the accounts of the wildlife out on the prairie are just phenomenal, and really second to none anywhere else. It's comparable to like the Serengeti of Africa, where you have herds of thousands and thousands of animals, whether that's pronghorn or deer, elk, bison. I think that's the biggest thing I see. And then just, imagining the habitat as it historically would have been with those, you got these large swaths of grass and sagebrush out there, but then in between those, you have these, creek bottoms and riparian areas, little wetlands that are like little oases out there where there's going to be tons of wildlife, tons of birds, tons of insects, things like that. So it's all those really, riparian areas, I think, that really tie everything together and make all those animals, plants, everything interact and function together.
Yeah. What I can assume based on what you just shared with me there, but I'm curious, when you first caught wind of this whole idea and were considering joining, why'd you do it? Why did this vision call to you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm a prairie guy, like through and through. I love grasslands, and that's always been where my passion has been. But I think when early in my career, I was doing restoration and tallgrass prairie restoration, and I really enjoyed it. But I was working on a smaller landscape, and that's great. People should keep doing that. But I always wanted something bigger and thought of, how do we make things bigger? How do we bring back animals that maybe aren't present on the landscape, or a habitat that's really degraded? And so when I found American Prairie, it kind of put all those pieces together for me, where like the scale is big enough, and you're focusing on all parts of the ecosystem, not just grass or not just one species of wildlife or just birds. It's all encompassing. So that's what was really attractive about it.
Was there a moment, I don't know, when you were actually out there in the field at some point, or really any point in your time where this vision became real for you? Like, I got to believe there was like this hypothetical. You're like, oh wow, there's this really cool mission this organization has. They want to do all those things you just described. But I'm sure it must have just seemed like this distant out there idea. Was there some point where all of a sudden you realized, oh wow, this is a real thing. It could actually happen, or I'm starting to see it happen, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think like when you're thinking about that like realization of something happening, I think there are those moments, you get glimpses of those moments where a lot of the pieces kind of collide again, and they're it's whole for a few seconds again, where you look one direction, there are no bison, but you turn around and oh, there's 24 bison grazing in a bottom. And I can think of one specific moment. I was out, this was, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. I was out checking fence early in the morning. There's, a little fog down in the bottoms. There's dew on the grass. And I stopped to fix something on the fence. I fixed it. And then I turned around and I was putting everything back in my four-wheeler, and a half a dozen sharptails, flushed 20 feet away from me. They've been there the whole entire time. And then, I look a little further down the draw and there's, 10 or 15 mule deer grazing. And then I look further down the draw and there are like 24 bison down there grazing. And that's what really, the sun was just right. All the pieces were there. The birds were singing, things like that. And so you get that glimpse into seeing all those things interacting at one time. So that's one moment. And you get those kind of on a daily basis. You see those semblances of that stuff. You don't get it all every day, but there are a lot of moments like that.
What does that feel like when you see that and you see a little bit of a glimmer of that possibility?
Yeah, it's real exciting for me. Like I've wanted to see things like this my whole life. And so being able to be part of that, it's real exciting. But then, when you're actually there in that moment, it's like one of those times where you just like lean back and smile and you're like, this is where I want to be, type of moment. And so there's just like this joy that comes with experiencing those little glimpses, those little moments.
Yeah. I want to kind of rewind just a little bit. We were talking about why this work matters, and you talked about how grasslands are the most, threatened and in decline ecosystems across the world. But I'm not sure everybody understands why grasslands actually matter. You mentioned that they support a lot of wildlife, but why does this kind of habitat matter, and why do these animals still matter today? Right? You mentioned bison, you mentioned sharptails. You mentioned mule deer and pronghorn, all these different things that live out there. In a world like we live in today, a modern world that is pretty far removed from a lot of that stuff for most people, why is this something worth paying attention to and working on?
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. There's like the environmental side, and then there's like there's the human side. And so like environmentally, like just looking at it through like a climate change lens, or biodiversity loss globally, things like that, like this can definitely impact those things in a positive way, slow them or stop them in certain areas like ours here. But I think the bigger thing for me is like the human part of this. Like we live in this fast, noisy world. Everything's always go, go, go. And the prairie is a place when you take the time to get out there and spend time out there, it's dark, it's quiet, it's calm. And those are things that we have rapidly lost in the last 100 years. And I think people are now realizing, and studies are showing that, people need nature. People need those calm, quiet spaces, especially in a world like today's world. And so this is one of those places that you can still get that and experience that. And so those are the couple of reasons I really think it's important.
Yeah. So walk me through a little bit of the progress so far. You mentioned that you guys are trying to buy land that is up for sale and help kind of accumulate this land base, bring back these pieces, these wildlife that have been missing. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. We lease and own land, and so in total, we manage a little over 600,000 acres of private land, DNRC, which is owned by the state of Montana, and Bureau of Land Management land. And so, progress-wise, we have a huge land base. We're starting to connect to those public pieces of land by buying those smaller pieces in between. And from a people standpoint, we allow access to almost all of our property for various uses. And so, people-wise, this has been very successful. People can come out, experience the prairie. When we're looking at it through restoration lens, bison are the ones that always make the headline, and we have a little over 900 bison right now in two herds on a little over 40,000 acres. And so that's a big win for us. We can get those animals back on the landscape. And then habitat-wise, we've got a lot going on. We've restored several thousand acres of previous crop ground, and so that has been returned back to prairie. And then we do a lot of riparian work and prairie dog work as well. And so putting in beaver dam analogs and log structures to help slow down water and help in areas where erosion has been a factor in these creek bottoms. And then prairie dogs are another keystone species. So we do a lot of work around plague mitigation and keeping those prairie dogs alive and on the landscape. And so, bison, those creek areas, and prairie dogs are the three areas where we've really done a lot of work.
And you might have said it and I missed it, but what's the scale of the landscape that you guys own or manage between all the leasing and the owning and the opportunities you guys have there? What's that number now?
A little over 600,000 acres that we manage.
Okay. And then there's the million acres of the Charles M. Russell, right?
Yep,
And
so
then
that's adjacent to most of our lands. And then we're right next door to the Upper Missouri Breaks Monument as well, which is about a little over 300,000 acres.
Okay. So you could look at that as saying there's almost 2 million acres of, relatively protected landscape in this zone, right? That's a pretty substantial footprint.
Yeah, it's a really cool region because you have the Fish and Wildlife Service there with the refuge. American Prairie is there. You have the monument, which has some more protections on it. And then, the ranching community too has really, there's a ton of people that have put conservation easements on their places or are doing their own, beaver dam analog work and things like that. And so it's kind of an area of the country where there's a ton of conservation work happening across the board with all different kinds of landowners.
Yeah, that's I definitely felt like you could feel you were in a wild place, even though it was also a worked place in some portions. It was still that wild kind of beating heart of the place was very much alive. Going through there, I remember thinking we better make sure we've got plenty of gas because you've got a long ways to go between any kind of fuel up opportunities. I mean, it's a wild out there place. And you could definitely, in many ways, it did feel more remote and wilder than much of Yellowstone, than much of national parks I've been to or national forests that I've been to where there's so many people and so much tourism. Your region had all of the wild elements of that with a much smaller human footprint, which was really cool. You brought up bison. We got to talk about bison. We got to talk about buffalo. I had this amazing experience there getting to participate in that public hunt you guys have there. But you, if I remember right, were very involved from the early days of your time with American Prairie with bison, and your kind of role has continued to evolve to now overseeing a lot of that stuff. But this whole idea of bringing bison back to a landscape, That sounds complicated. That sounds like a lot of work, but it's all very kind of just, I can imagine, but I don't really know what it looks like on the ground. Um, tell me a little bit about what that entails. And I guess give me a little bit of background too. When you think about bison, they're such a unique species, right? In our nation, they're our national mammal. They're iconic. I think we all imagine them as this unbelievable animal that used to exist in great abundance. And most people probably know that they don't exist like they used to, but they probably don't quite know that they hardly roam free anywhere anymore, right?
Right.
So why have you guys been trying to help establish something like that again with that species in particular? And tell me what that process has been like over the last, years and years that you've been involved.
Yeah, no, I mean, reason number one we're involved in the bison world is the ecology of it. And so you have this species that used to number in the millions on the plains, and they had an outsized impact on everything out there, from the habitat to all the other animals. And so without the bison on the landscape, it cannot be a fully functioning ecosystem. There's just a role they play that is outsized and so important to the ecology of the region. So that's why we have bison. Now, yeah, the bison are complicated, like you said, like extremely complicated. And so, they're one of the few animals in the country that have dual classification as livestock and wildlife. And in our case, our bison are classified as livestock, which is great for us because we can get them back on the landscape right now. And so what that looks like for us is, we brought our first 16 bison in 2005. I've been here for a little over 10 years now, and so I've seen the program ramp up and grow a lot. And so, in many senses, we're very similar to a ranch operation, and in other senses, we have a bunch of biologists on staff too that know a ton about wildlife management, and so we've kind of found this spot where, yes, our bison are livestock, but we can manage our bison to see the benefits of the species being back on the ground. And so we can allow all those natural interactions to take place while still following all the livestock rules and regulations that the state and the federal government have. And so, we have to handle our bison, we harvest bison, things like that. And we're able to do it at a quicker pace than, if bison were in the region were to be classified as wildlife, the state or the federal government have to run that public process to reintroduce bison back to the landscape. So we're able to do it much quicker because we're a private landowner and we can own bison. So
yeah, and I think to the public, like in my experience, nobody would know, right? They seem like wild bison out there. I mean, they are, as far as I'm concerned, they are wild bison out there living wild bison lives, doing buffalo stuff on a vast, basically unfenced, unfettered landscape, right? It just comes down to this kind of like bureaucratic stuff you guys have to deal with, right? That comes down to this, what we can call them, and then all these other rules and regulations you guys have to face. Do you think that bison being designated as wildlife is a thing that'll happen in our lifetime, in a state like Montana or somewhere like that? Is that something that we might be able to look forward to someday? And to you guys being able to, take down your outer fence and just let them roam again like they used to without worries about all this crazy stuff?
Yeah, I do think it'll happen in our lifetime. And for a few reasons. I think one, like you said earlier, they're the national mammal. And then on top of that, when you look at, do people love bison? Yes, they do. Like every survey result that I've ever seen, people in general love bison. They love bison as wildlife. And so I think the public support is there. It's an education and awareness issue that haven't been addressed yet. And if you look at the history of, North American wildlife management, there's one animal really left that has kind of been untouched from a from a state or federal management approach, and that's bison. And so I think because of those reasons, when the time is right, when the politics are right, I think it's coming. It's just a matter of when.
So how do you think that your guys' work lines up with that? Like, if you had to envision the future, what do you see American Prairie's role in that maybe possible future down the road?
Yeah, I think we're an intermediate step to that. I think when you look back at bison and bison conservation, it started with ranching and ranchers gathering up the few last bison, and then the federal government protecting a few bison. And we're in this like interim phase, which has been 100 plus years now, of bison being behind fences and heavily managed. And when I look at the bison industry as a whole, it has trended towards, letting bison be bison and those natural interactions playing out on the landscape. And, I think we can help push that forward and, bring bison to kind of the forefront of conservation and that awareness and education need. And then at some point, though, the either the state or federal government or the public are going to have to be the ones that step up to take over. Yes, we have these animals, but I think we're here to show that what is possible. That's not our job to implement it necessarily, and so we can help that process. We can work out all the kinks, like what is it like to manage bison on large landscapes. We can play a very important role here. And then when everyone else is ready, then let's talk about wild bison.
Yeah. So walk me through a little bit more of the details of the impact they have on the landscape, right? We've heard about how bison are possibly like a keystone species. They change the landscape around them. What's that actually look like on the ground? How do they actually do that? What's the trickle effects or the ripple effects of them being back? Have you started to actually see that in the 20 years or whatever it's been that they've been back?
Yeah, we've got several different research projects going on, and most of them are long-term, looking at the long-term impact of bison grazing. And that's one thing about the prairie ecosystem is because of the lack of moisture, it is slow to change. It takes decades to really notice big impacts, and maybe even longer, multiple decades. And so with we're in our second decade with bison. We just went past 20 years, and we're starting to see some little things show up. And in practice, I think when you like seeing the bison out on the landscape and kind of researching what they've done over the past 20 years, the big things we see is their movement and how they move and where they spend their time. And so generally, bison being a prey animal, they don't like to be in confined places. They don't like to be where they can't see. And because they're adapted to a hot, dry prairie ecosystem, they don't need water all the time. And so we see a lot of improvement and change in our riparian areas. And so in those creeks and wetlands, we're seeing a lot more of like the sedges and cattails show up. Woody species are starting to come back in the draws where it's a little wetter. So
yeah,
like willows, things like that, other brush are starting to increase, which has ripple effects for birds and voles and you name it. And so largely that's because of how they're grazing and using the landscape. They're spending their time upland and not focused on those lower areas.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when we were out there walking around, you pointing out some of these different creek areas and riparian areas where there was definitely this lush growth and all sorts of new shrubbery and things that you said had not been there, which that's got to be pretty neat to see that just in your own time there. See, even if it's slow, seeing how the earth can change, how the vegetative diversity can change, how that canvas can shift right in front of your eyes over the course of some number of years. That's got to be a really exciting part of this project. What about the challenges, though? I gotta imagine. I mean, just being kind of up close with bison, the little bit that I was, um, they're a little bit edgy creatures. I mean, I can only imagine what kinds of experiences you have had. Walk me through what some of the challenges have been with bringing these animals back, managing them, letting them be bison, but at the same time, I'm sure you guys have some constraints. You guys have neighbors that don't want them on their land. You've got all this other stuff. What have some of those things been?
Yeah, that's one thing I definitely did not anticipate when I started working here is the challenges, I guess, and the amount of time spent with relationships and people. And it's not honestly, it's the bison don't take the majority of the time. It's the people that we spend most of our time with, whether that's a neighbor or the politics of it, other partners, conservation districts, you name it across the board. Bison take a lot of people time, and that's okay. That's what it takes. There are, the political challenges are very real. And so it does give the opportunity though to show people that like there is a place for bison. It can be done successfully, and like you said, edgy creature. That's a very true statement. You definitely, just like I had to shift my approach to working more with like neighbors or conservation districts, and focus on that people part of bison management. You also have to shift your perception on animal management just in general, because they are such a different critter, and they really do take a different mindset to be successful with.
Yeah. When I think about them being edgy creatures, I think about one of the stories that I think that you shared with me. It was either you or Lars maybe shared it with me about a hunt that you guys were on, or he was on, one of the two of you, and you guys have had some problems with like bachelor groups of bulls coming in on you while you're butchering a bison. Can you tell me about that? If you've seen that, if that was you who had that experience, could you walk me through some of those types of experiences?
Yeah, Lars and I actually had a real interesting experience because it was in the dark. I had shot a bull late in the day. It was 10 below, and we were like, okay, we got to hurry. We got to get this out of here. Well, of course, it's a bison. Like there's nothing quick, as you know. And yeah, we're gutting this animal, going to quarter it out, carry it out, and we keep hearing this crunching in the snow, and it keeps getting louder and closer. And then all of a sudden you can hear breath and snorting a little bit, and you're like, where is this coming from? And we have headlamps on, and finally they're close enough, which is probably within 30 yards. We shine our headlamps up, and you can see their eyes, just these handful of bulls just staring at us like, what is going on? What, and they're curious, they're just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And we stand up and wave at them and shout a little bit, and it doesn't appear to do anything. So we go back to gutting and look back up, and they're a few steps closer, and you're like, okay, at this point that's too close. And so we actually had a sled to sled out some of the meat. And so we got the big sled up and stood it up in the air and started banging on it, making some odd noises for a very quiet prairie at night, and that was enough to make them go back to like 50 yards. But they hung out with us the whole entire time until we got the bison out of there.
Wow. So in Yellowstone, like every year, it seems like somebody gets charged by one or two or several a year. Have you guys ever had an actual like dangerous encounter with them yet?
No, not with the public. We've had real good luck. We try to educate our guests as much as possible on respecting those animals in their bubble, but then also showing people the signs of what a bison's temperature is essentially, and giving people the tools to be successful. And in general, I think because we harvest our bison every year, we harvest a portion of the herd, they're a little weary of people on foot, and I think that helps us a little bit. They look at every person with a little hesitation, and generally, if you're paying attention to those bison, they tell you, when they're comfortable and when they're uncomfortable. And so I think because of that education and the guests we get, like, it's not easy to come out to the prairie and hang out with our bison. Like, you get some pretty hardy folks, they're experienced folks. And I think that also helps is the people we are getting are experienced with wildlife. They understand, they read, they know what's going on out there. And so I think that prevents a lot of issues. So
Yeah. Yeah, so you brought up the harvest or the hunt. Why is a public hunting opportunity part of what you guys prioritize and make happen out there?
yeah, it's written into our management that that bison are, although they are classified as livestock, they historically have been wildlife, and they're one of our big wildlife species in North America. And the wildlife management in North America, it's a public trust they're public trust. And so although we own these bison, they're on American Prairie lands, all that stuff, we still try to we want these animals to be viewed as though they are everybody's. They are part of the ecosystem. They are wild. They are not by definition, they are classified as livestock, but in practice, they are a wild animal and historically were. And so we want to make sure everybody has that opportunity. So yeah, we have that public harvest opportunity where you can put your name in the drawing, and you can come out and have that chance to harvest a bison and experience that animal just like you would a deer, an elk, a pronghorn. Yeah.
Yeah, so walk me through what that process looks like. How many tags do you guys give out in a year? I got to live it firsthand. But for those who have not had that unique chance, what does that look like? What's a bison hunt? If you were going to describe a bison hunt or harvest out there, for someone, how do you paint that picture for them?
Yeah, so we generally have between 20 and 30 opportunities a year for the public. And we base that number one off of, we want everyone to have a good experience. And so everyone has their own 3-day block of time to come out, and there's going to be no one else chasing the bison herd around at that time. So it's kind of your playground at that point. And then, so we get our number. So our schedule is kind of limited by giving people that really good experience. You can only have so many, time periods every year. And then we also run modeling software on our population, on our herds. And so we know kind of what amount of animals we need to harvest, whether they're younger, older, bulls, cows, etc. And so our managers can say, we need to harvest this many mature bulls this year. And so we can put those into the drawing, and people can have that opportunity. And so, yeah, we've grown from, in 2018 was our first public harvest. I think we had 6 bison harvested that year, and we've grown it up to 30 on most years. And we get about 5,000 applicants now for those 30 opportunities. So it's become really, really popular. And I think, it's experience-wise, I try to tell people it's like I compare it to a prairie elk hunt. Like, use the terrain, use the wind. Most days, those animals are a little wary of people on the ground because they are hunted, they are harvested, and so, yeah, it's not as easy as some people make it out to be.
I agree with that. I would also say that the challenge definitely continues after the animal's on the ground. The scale of these animals just blew my mind. I was just super fortunate to get a chance to find a mature bull in a little bachelor group of bulls bedded in a perfect location. I was able to do this big swing, go down this other ridge line, sneak up the backside of it, get downwind of them. Had to belly crawl up and over this ridge line through some cactus. Got a bunch of nasty cactus spines in me. It was picture perfect otherwise, though. I got to lay down about 80 yards away from this big old bull and just wait till he finally stood up. And then when he did, got a good shot, got him down. And I knew he was big. And I knew all of these guys were big. But when you stand next to it in real life and see that when it's on its side, the side of its belly is almost up to your chest. I mean, these things are gigantic. I remember thinking this is like a dinosaur laying next to me. How you've been able to do this a bunch yourself? How have you thought about these hunts? How have these hunts or harvests gone for you? How about the breakdown? What's been your experience on butchering and moving these animals? I mean, that was just a big thing for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've had the luxury of, when doing stuff for work, being able to use equipment, which is spectacular. But with these public opportunities and the ones I've harvested personally, I don't get to use a skid steer or a tractor. So I have packed out plenty of bison meat on my back, on sleds, on game carts, through sagebrush. You experienced all this. But that is probably one of the number one things we get feedback on is like, I didn't realize. And these are experienced people that have been to Africa. They've shot a ton of elk, and people are like, wow, that was a lot of work. And yeah, it is. I mean, when you're talking 1/4, with a bone in it can weigh well over 200 pounds. Like, how do you pack that thing out?
I can still feel it in my shoulders, I think, when you bring it up.
Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy. One thing I was just thinking for people listening, especially if somebody who maybe isn't a hunter themselves, they might be thinking, well, these guys say they're trying to recover bison. Why are they shooting them? To that person, why are we shooting these bison? Your big goal, one of your major missions and visions is to restore buffalo back to the prairie at some scale resembling what it used to be in the past. Why'd you let Mark Kenyon go out there and kill one of these buffalo that you're trying to bring back and make numerous again? That part of it, I think, needs a little more clarification.
Yeah, it's, at its most basic, it's a capacity question. It's a management tool. And so it is not easy or uncomplicated to keep expanding bison acreage. And so you have federal processes, state processes, you have the money question, how much does this cost to raise these bison, things like that. And so there are factors that slow down the expansion of like the amount of acreage the bison have. And we're actively working on increasing that. But in the meantime, we have a limited number of acres and we know how many bison we can have on those acres. And so this is one of the management tools we can use to control that number of bison on the landscape. And I think the bigger thing for me when I look at our management is how, yes, I could go ship those bison tomorrow. We wouldn't have to harvest these bison, but what a better way to create more advocates and create awareness and education for bison than letting people experience them. And that's why it's written into our management plan. Yes, we're going to harvest some of these animals. Bison have been hunted for tens of thousands of years. So why can't we, why shouldn't we hunt them today? And so when I can invite somebody out and, we draw their name and, they probably have never had the opportunity to shoot a bison. They may never again. And so we can kind of serve the greater, bison conservation story and education and awareness while fulfilling a management goal at the same time. So it's kind of a two-pronged management style there, which is, it's really fun to see. I just actually read through our, we send out a survey to everyone that has a bison harvest. And I read through the results this morning, and it's like, this is the greatest thing ever. I've never thought I would get to experience this. I'm so thankful for this opportunity. That's the feedback we get from almost 100% of people. And so I know there are people coming out of this experience that didn't, they maybe didn't know a lot about bison conservation or the species or the experience you can have with bison, and now they do. And so those are advocates down the road.
Another thing I noticed while I was out there was that when I switched when I toggled the switch in my mind and shifted from just watching buffalo or bison like I have my whole life, right? And in Yellowstone or Theodore Roosevelt National Park or different places like that, I've been around bison a lot. But when I switched into hunt mode, I all of a sudden saw things I never saw before. I noticed things that I had never noticed before. I was paying attention to these different things. It was a totally different experience. All of a sudden, all of these behaviors that I had ignored or kind of looked past, like, stood out as very important. Like, oh, this is what this tail raise means. Or here's how, they're reacting to my behavior in this situation. And it was just fascinating how different of an experience I had with these animals when I was able to actually be a hunter, and go from just being an observer to truly a participant on the landscape with them. Participating in a thing like you just said that humans have been doing for tens of thousands of years. That was a powerful thing to live through. And then I love the fact that you have that, written into your management plan in like a very concrete, durable way. Like, this is a big part of what we are and what we're doing, what we plan to do. I'm thrilled to hear that. What's the long-term trajectory for your buffalo herd? You're just shy of 1,000 right now. I know you mentioned you guys have something like just shy of 50,000 acres that they can currently graze on, and that's a mixture, right, of owned acres and permitted acres of public land, right?
Right.
What kind of herd size realistically do you think you can get to in 10 years or 20 years? And what's kind of standing in the way of reaching that goal?
Yeah, so this is the challenging part of bison management, is how do you expand acreage? And so like you said, we're a little over 900 right now, and we'll be hovering for the next couple of years around that 1,000, maybe a little more than 1,000 number, is the plan. And then we do have opportunity to expand to some more land, looking out 2, 3, 4 years. And so we can, by year 5 from today, we can think about, approaching 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 bison. Beyond that, that's where the challenges come in, is how do you expand onto more BLM lands or state lands? And that's the politics part of this. And so we're actively working on that. But there are some significant challenges to that politically. And so I'm hesitant to say where we could be in 10 or 20 because of the challenges we're facing right now. And so I would say, we are going to continue to try to grow our herds. We can get to that like 1,400 mark in 5 years. Beyond that, though, I think, the politics have a bigger influence than I ever thought it would. And so, we're working on it, and we'll keep working on it.
Okay, let's just imagine, though, 20 years from now, let's say the politics are right, and it puts you guys in a position to be able to expand that acreage. 20 years from now, best case scenario, my oldest son will be 28. He'll be an adult out there on his own, maybe living in Montana, wants to go on a bison hunt someday like his old man did. What do you think my son Everett will possibly be able to see out there 20 years, best case scenario, if things line up right? Walk me through that imagined future.
I think if it's bison as livestock on the landscape, there will be more than now. And I think there will be more opportunity than now as far as harvesting. And so, when we start talking about herds that are growing to 1,300, 1,400 animals, you're your rate of increase on that herd is going to be 20 to 25% a year of animals that either need to be shipped or harvested if there's limited acreage. And so like opportunity is going to go up, I think, even 5 years from now. But when you think about 20 years from now, if the land is there, there's tons of opportunity for everyone. It's going to be a whole different ball game of, people being able to experience these animals on the landscape because they're, the reproductive potential of bison is extremely high. And so if we make the acreage available, like you said, if the politics are right, if the acreage is right, there's going to be a ton of opportunity.
All right. Well, I'm gonna force you to pick a number. Pick a number. Let's just say you guys own 600,000 acres, or own and lease 600,000 right now, right? That's
own
the case.
Lease, yep.
Yeah. So you own and lease 600,000 acres right now. Let's just say, to give us something to work with, hypothetically, it is now politically and bureaucratically feasible to run bison on all of that in 20 years. What do you think? What kind of herd could be out there on that kind of scale?
If it's politically possible, that doesn't mean it's financially possible. So I'm going to throw that caveat in there. There won't be bison on every acre out there, But even if we added two or three more management units that had bison on it, you're easily talking, growing herds to 3,000 to 5,000 animals, pretty rapidly, if all the pieces are lined up.
Amazing. Is there ever a world where something like the Charles M. Russell Wildlife Refuge could have them running out there too?
Yeah, I mean, it would not be probably under American Prairie management. That would be a different scenario where bison are classified as wildlife. Whether that's by the state or federal government. It's in their management plan. They can have this large native grazer. But again, the politics have to be right for that to happen. Okay. Someday, maybe.
So you keep on like raining on my parade with politics. So I'm going to ask you one more politics question. So there's been this recent news coming out of the BLM, which has proposed revoking your guys' grazing permits on the BLM lands that you currently graze bison on. Steve and Allison talked about this on the Meat Eater podcast a few months ago. So if anybody wants to get into the nitty gritty of that whole thing, they can. What I'm interested in is like the on the ground impact. Let's say that stands, that holds, and you guys have your grazing permits revoked. You no longer can run bison on, many of these lands. And I've been out there on your guys' stuff. There's lots of, it's all mixed, right? There's BLM and American Prairie land and BLM and American Prairie land, and there's no fences out there. I would never know that I was on BLM land or American Prairie. It would all just feel like one giant grassland. The only way I knew it is I could look on my app and see those property lines. But if all of a sudden you guys couldn't run them on that land, what does that mean for your buffalo program? What would you guys have to do? What would they be restricted to? I'm just curious, like what the on the ground impacts of this political situation might be.
Yeah, it does. So yeah, though that change would necessitate some big management changes in the short term. Long term, I think we're still going to move forward, but in the short term, we would have to consider building more fences in these places that are currently unfenced to get bison off of BLM land onto the pieces of ground that are private. And so there would be some shifting around with that. I think, we hope that we don't plan on getting rid of any extra bison. We think because we do own a lot of private land, we can move some bison around and kind of weather the storm essentially by just changing where they're grazing. We may have to reduce populations a little bit, which would mean more harvests in the short term. But realistically, it makes the crew on the ground is the one that's going to feel impacted. My team on the ground, our manager, our techs, our specialists, the ones that are out there with the bison every day, it's going to make their jobs, a little more difficult. It's going to be more management of those bison, putting more bison on less acres, things like that for the short term, while everything plays out. So slight reduction maybe in population, but very different management. And it could change the harvest stuff because of the acres the bison would have to go to, where it might not be conducive to a good harvest experience. And so there could be reduced harvest in that way. I would hope that the harvest doesn't have to get shut down, but I can't guarantee that with these changes.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, all of that stuff's TBD as that proposal works its way through the system. And I'm sure there'll be challenges. There are challenges already and all that kind of stuff. But something you mentioned there, shipping bison other places. You guys have been involved in helping restore buffalo in other places other than just, your own footprint. What have you guys been doing on that front?
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite parts of the job is that, helping others get bison back on their landscapes or working with partners to supplement herds, things like that. And so, we've shipped out roughly, I believe it's just under 700 bison to other herds around the country. So Arizona, Washington, South Dakota, Montana, you name it, a lot of different places. And so we're doing that for a number of reasons. A bunch of it is to tribal herds that are either they're getting started and building their own herds, so we can help build that population, or for genetics. So we have taken kind of a deep dive into the genetics of our bison, and we know where they came from. They're highly diverse, and so they're very desirable from a conservation standpoint or for production standpoint. They can add a lot of genetic diversity into other herds. And so, that's one of the big reasons we ship out. And so, with those, I think the 700 we've shipped out have went to 14 different herds in 9 different states. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And who knows how many more animals those 700 have created, right? That's the ripple effects there have got to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
What about other critters? We've talked a lot about buffalo. What are some of the other species that you are most excited about or have seen the most progress with over your time there? I know there's so many kind of charismatic animals that live out there that we've come to know and love for a lot of us from afar. But do you have any other success stories or, hey, this is looking like we can make a difference here kind of stories that you're excited about keeping an eye on or working on in the future?
Yeah, I think, there's 2 more that come to mind, and they're probably just about as controversial as bison. So I guess I have a thing for controversial species. Prairie dogs are one big area where not a lot of people think of them, as this super important thing, but in our ecosystem, they're extremely important. And so we've done a lot of work to increase the size of our prairie dog towns, with the plan down the road being to reintroduce the endangered black-footed ferret. And so that's one big thing where we've seen significant acreage increases in prairie dogs. And then the other one... Hold on.
Oh. Before you go any further, I got to press on that a little bit. Why are prairie dogs important? Like, why is that something that we want to have back on the landscape? And then number 2, why are black-footed ferrets somehow tied to them? Just want to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, so the importance of prairie dogs, so they disrupt the landscape in a big way, but through their grazing. And so they're grazing and clipping. So they're eating vegetation, but they're also clipping vegetation because they love to see. And so they, in this sea of, sagebrush and grasses that are, 12 to 24 inches tall, they're clipping these areas and they're keeping them clipped, kind of like a lawn. And so there are a lot of species that certain bird species that'll only nest in that type of habitat. There's also, it changes the plant diversity on those prairie dog towns. And so different plants at different densities. And so it might have benefits to certain insects, or, there's some, like vetch is one that does pretty well in a prairie dog town. It's pretty nutritious. And so other animals like pronghorn will show up and eat that. And then prairie dogs are a food source for tons and tons of animals. So badgers, coyotes, hawks, eagles, you can just run down the list of things that eat prairie dogs. So, and then in relation to ferrets, the other thing that eats prairie dogs, it's not, their diet, it's like about 95% of their diet is prairie dogs. They're pretty much exclusive to prairie dogs. And so without prairie dogs, black-footed ferrets don't survive.
Okay. And they are endangered, missing from most of their home range, but there have been some reintroduction efforts in the general neighborhood, right?
Yeah, so there's in total, I believe there's a little over 400 ferrets in the wild in North America. In our area, there used to be a population in the CMR refuge. That population is no longer present. The prairie dogs got plague and therefore died, and the reintroduction wasn't successful. But on the Fort Belknap Reservation, they've been very successful. They have between 40 and 50 ferrets out there right now on the reservation. So it's really cool conservation success there.
Okay. So that's exciting. Do you think that you guys would ever be able to restore them on AP lands?
Yeah, we're hopeful. I mean, we're headed in that direction. You need a minimum of 1,500 acres of prairie dogs, like in a complex within 1 kilometer of each other, and so it's a significant amount of acreage. And so prairie dogs grow every year, it seems like, but they're also susceptible to big weather swings and things like that, and disease. And so it's a constant balancing act of trying to keep them growing and alive, and then, increasing that prairie dog acreage. So we'll get there eventually. It just takes time.
Okay. And what was the other controversial animal you're excited about or interested in?
Grizzly bears.
Yes.
Seeing, I still have not witnessed one in the prairie ecosystem, and I have not found any tracks myself, but when I get videos and, pictures from guests or people who are out on the landscape and they find a set of tracks in the mud down by the river, like that, something that is that big and has that kind of larger than life presence on the landscape, all of a sudden showing up in your, on one of our properties is just like an amazing thing to smile about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people think about grizzlies as a mountain animal, right? And that's because today, that's primarily the only place we encounter them. But historically, they were a prairie species, right? When Lewis and Clark were, coming down the Missouri River, they were seeing grizzlies all along the way once they got into the Dakotas and eastern Montana and all of that. So this is their old home range. This is where they thrived in the past. And now they're slowly filtering out of the Rocky Mountain front, heading east, and they're hitting this complex that you guys are a part of now and finding pretty welcome territory.
Yep.
Walk me through like the exciting parts of that, and then what possible challenges might there be with that happening too, and how are you guys thinking about how your mission and vision includes them as they start naturally, arriving?
Yeah, I think, a rancher that runs some cattle on the property that we have documented grizzlies over the past 3 years. He summed it up pretty well for me one time where he said, like, the landscape is still delicious. The flavor just changed a little bit. And
yeah.
And I love that quote because he understands he has to change just for that bear to be there. And that's what we've changed our management, made things more bear friendly, bear safe. And, we have staff that's what they work on. They go out to neighbors, they help prevent problems so those bears can be successful. So we work with those folks, with those cattle to make sure that bear can be successful. I believe 3 years ago was the first documented set of tracks we had. We've had photos since then. And we just had I think it was about 2 weeks ago, we had confirmed tracks again in the mud. And so they're still there around, which is really cool.
I'm going to be there in like a month and a half or something. So just make sure to remind me of what little zone this is, so I'm on my A game when we come paddling through or camping at night.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely, canoeing the rivers and stuff, most people don't carry bear spray in the prairie, but we definitely recommend it now.
Yeah. Well, there is something I recognize, and I've experienced, like there are challenges with sharing the landscape with an animal like that, of course, and you have to respect that. But at the same time, to your earlier point, it changes the entire aura of the place. When you're out there and an animal like that is also out there with you, you pay attention to things differently. You operate differently. There is a different energy in the air. There is an electricity present. I've often described it like all of my senses are turned up to 11. I am at my human best when I know I am walking through grizzly territory, because you got to be on your A game, right?
Right.
And so that sense of wildness that it's bringing back to the prairie and bringing back to this swath of country that you guys are trying to help, to some degree restore to its prior glory. Of course, that's like an important part of that. Challenges acknowledged, but also benefits acknowledged. So it's a very interesting microcosm of the entire story of what you guys are trying to do, which is restore this landscape to some semblance of what it once was, so that the land is healthy again, so that people can experience what this used to be like, so people can have this connection with the natural world and with wildlife, so we can see wildlife at that scale as it used to be, so we can experience this vast, unfenced, relatively unchanged, big, wild grassland place that's, the scale of something like that's so incredible to experience. I personally can attest to that. But at the same time, we talked about the politics earlier, right? I know you guys have faced all sorts of challenges in trying to do that, because it's something different. Grizzlies are something different. Bison are something different. You guys running a program like this with conservation goals is different than some of the traditional ranching practices in the area. And so change raises hackles, change raises question marks, change can be scary, right? All of those things, right, I think are probably true. But at the same time, I think that this is a really unique story of pursuing a dream with hope and tackling those challenges, though, in a common sense, practical way. Like, you guys haven't just, from everything I've been able to see from afar, you guys haven't just said, oh, we want to chase this conservation dream, and if you disagree with us, well, screw you. You guys have seemed to take this very kind of let's be a good neighbor approach to this, and in trying to work with folks who see things differently than you, and trying to open things to the public and bring the public. I mean, not try to. You guys have opened it almost entirely to the public and welcomed people out there. And can you just give me a little bit more of a semblance of how you think about being a good neighbor, how you, as managing your landscape programs and sometimes having to think about this wider landscape beyond just your own land, how that makes the community aspect of this maybe just as important as anything?
Yeah, sure. I think that challenging part, that social part of change is kind of what gives us like some huge opportunities here to do some really like fun and innovative things where there's a lot of there's kind of a, in the conservation world, decades and decades ago, there was kind of a preservationist lock it up attitude towards conservation or towards wild places, and that there couldn't be this like kind of bringing together of landscapes where you have a working landscape and you have conservation and you have wildlife and you have all these pieces. They don't have to be separate. And so that's kind of how I go into like all of my conversations with neighbors and communities is like, okay, what do you need? You know, why are you here? What part of, you know, management at American Prairie, you know, scares you, or what are you concerned about? Like, let's throw all that stuff on the table and let's just talk about it. Like my goal is always to be able to have coffee with everybody. And so if I can have a cup of coffee and we can talk about those things, at the end of the day, 80% probably or more of what we talk about, we have in common. Like, we all love grass. We all love being outside. We all love wildlife. And so if, you know, we're only 20% apart, that's not that big a deal. We can figure that stuff out. And so I think, you know, being able to like show folks that like it's not in this or that, it's a both. And yeah, it's going to be complicated. There's going to be lots of hard conversations, but that's when you have something that's as special as these grasslands are, like that's what you have to do. Like, no matter what side of the table you're on, like you want to come to it because that place means something to you. It provides value to you. It's part of you, you know, at the end of the day. And so it's important to go into all those things with an open mind and understanding, you know, what everyone needs. And then, you know, we can, you know, build together rather than apart.
Yeah. That's I think that's a smart way to approach it. And I think that, you know, you guys have done a good job on the other side of engaging other possible constituents and other possible supporters, and that being, you know, the outdoor community, right? You guys have opened up the land to outdoor recreation. You have a lot of hunting opportunities and access in the area. For someone listening who wants to get out there and who is a hunter, walk me through, you know, what's, you know, and actually not just as a hunter. Let's talk about all of the outdoor opportunities there on AP lands. How much of the land is accessible for hunting? What kinds of opportunities for that? But then also beyond that, give me like Scott Heidebrink's American Prairie recommended tour. What's like the top things I should go do if I want to go see this place and experience it and feel and see and kind of immerse myself in one of our last great vestiges of the Great Plains?
Yeah. Oh, so favorites. So I do hunt. I love to hunt, and that is a great way to get out and experience things because, you know, you're crawling around, you're getting poked by prickly pear cactuses, like you and I both have. You know, you see all the little things on the ground when you're out hunting. So that's a great way. About half of our acreage, deeded acres, and then are enrolled in block management or some other form of hunting program for various species, depending on the year. But then, you know, I'm also kind of a bird nerd, and so like right now, this time of year, May, June are spectacular. If you like birds, or, you know, if you have a life list, it's a great place to come for birds. Nice. We also we're in the process of constructing a track for mountain biking. And so that'll be coming online soon. Hopefully in the next, 6 to 9 months. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to get out and experience a prairie in whatever way you like. You can hike, bike, run, hunt, bird watch, you name it. You can do it on the prairie. So just get out there.
All right. It's hard to argue with that. There's no shortage of options. If I were to start, you guys have a number of big chunks of ground, but they're kind of disparate. There's some in, the closer to the Missouri Breaks. There's some, adjacent to the Charlie M. Russell Refuge, or some kind of in between. Is there any one of those units that it's like, hey, this is probably my favorite, or this one would be the one to start, or is that a hard question to put a finger on?
It is a hard question to answer. I mean, it is always fun to see bison on the landscape. So Sun Prairie is a great one. Where you had your bison harvest. So I always tell people to go there first, just because of the bison. Outside of that, I'd say anything in the Missouri Breaks. So anything along the Missouri River is spectacular terrain. You can have everything from, flat bench tops for easy hiking to some of the roughest stuff you can get into that are going to make you really work. So that and the breaks just provide so many different habitat varieties, from badlands to those sagebrush prairies, and so I like the breaks.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back from my return and explore that part of the area. Last kind of two-part question, I guess. It's actually just two questions, not really a two-part, just two separate questions. What has this project taught you about hope when it comes to conservation goals? I see a lot of hope. I see a lot of positive progress when I look at what you guys are trying to do. This big, audacious, crazy thing you guys are trying to do in the face of a good amount of pushback and a lot of questions, a lot of, misinformation, all this kind of stuff. But I still see that you guys seem to be chasing something that gives me hope. I'm curious what this has taught you about that.
Yeah, I think, I would have said, 10 years ago when I started this, like I was a little crazy, like with the amount of hope I had, like this is something I wanted to see and, it's possible. So I would have said I was a little crazy. And I think now, like having folks like you, or just some folks that camp at one of our campgrounds, or somebody that comes out bird watching, or somebody that sees the bison and they're like, this is really cool. Like I can totally see this. Like that. It's really empowering, because there are a lot of other people maybe that don't have that hope or even awareness that like this is possible. And so like, yeah, seeing other people like that switch go off in their head of like, oh, this is really neat. This is really cool. I want to be part of this. I want to see this, in whatever way. I love that.
Yeah. And then I got to believe that is a first step to one of the most important probably mountains for you guys to climb, which is just getting that broader public support, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Last thing I would like to leave us with here, and I've asked you to do this a few different times on specific issues or specific parts of this, but I just want to leave this conversation with a clear vision of the future. 50 years from now. We've talked 20 years from now when my son's 28, but let's zoom out to 50 years from now. You and I are hopefully retired, and we're looking back on what you've achieved at American Prairie and what your whole team has achieved there. What does that landscape look like in 50 years? What's out there in 76, I guess it would be. What's on the American Prairie? What's that place like? What's the draw for the rest of the world to come and see?
Yeah, so I think, the grass is still going to be there because it's grass, it's prairie, and everybody loves it. So we got the habitat, and then I think about like the way ranching is shifting and changing, like there's going to be less fences. And I also think there's going to be a ton more wildlife, but I also think there's still going to be cattle operations operating on the landscape. Like I think it is going to be a like showcase of having working lands with tons of wildlife and tons of conservation all working together. And then with people visiting it, seeing it, experiencing it. And so I really do think all that's possible, especially in 50 years. That's a long time. So I think we'll get there. I think everybody realizes how special it is out here, and I think everything, like all those pieces, are going to come together. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to be almost 90 at that point. So hopefully the technology and the medicine will be good enough that I'm still going to be kicking and slowly hiking my way around. And I plan to visit and follow up with you and let you know whether or not we reach that dream. and hopefully I'll be giving you a pat in the back and saying thank you for making it all possible.
That sounds great.
So that's the plan. And thank you, Scott, for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I appreciate it.